He didn't
It's
mean to say
positive.
it out
Really?
loud.
Are you serious?
The
Yes, we're
words
having a
escaped
baby.
before
I
he
can't
could
believe
stop
it. This is
them,
amazing.
hanging between them like a gunshot that echoed in the small kitchen. "You're pregnant, it's mine." He stood there frozen, one hand gripping the back of the chair, the other still holding his phone where the message had burned into his mind over and over again. 2 pink lines. Her name. A date that didn't lie. She didn't react the way he expected. No shock. No denial. No anger. She simply walked past him, reached the door, locked it slowly, and said in a voice so calm it terrified him, "Close the door." He did. The click sounded final, like something had just ended, or begun. He was a single dad, a man who had built his entire world around routine and responsibility after his wife's death 3 years earlier. His son was asleep in the next room. His life was careful. Controlled. And now it was unraveling. She leaned against the counter, one hand resting unconsciously on her stomach, eyes glossy but unblinking. She told him the truth then, not gently, not dramatically, just honestly. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't trapped him. She had tried to disappear instead. She reminded him of the night it happened, the night grief had broken him and loneliness had broken her, the night neither of them had talked about again. He remembered too well. The way he had sworn it was a mistake. The way she had nodded like she agreed, even though her silence had screamed otherwise. She told him she had left town for months because she knew he'd never choose her, not with a child, not with his son already needing so much of him. And now here he was, standing in front of her, accusing, afraid, shaking, not because he didn't believe her, but because he did. He asked the question he was most afraid of. "Are you keeping it?" She finally looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time her voice cracked. "I already am." The weight of that sentence crushed him. He thought of bedtime stories, school lunches, hospital bills, judgmental stares, and the fear of failing again. He thought of his late wife and the guilt that still followed him everywhere. And yet, when she started to cry silently, something inside him shifted. This wasn't a mistake. This was a life. He didn't know what to do, but he knew one thing: walking away would destroy him. As the chapter closes, he sits down across from her, breath unsteady, and says, "Then we need to talk, about everything." If this moment already has you hooked, imagine what comes next. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, because this story is only just beginning, and the next chapter changes everything. The conversation lasted hours, though neither of them noticed time passing. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant breathing of a sleeping child who had no idea his world was about to change. She told him everything, how she had been sick for weeks, how she'd stared at the test alone in a gas station bathroom, how she had whispered his name and cried until she couldn't anymore. She admitted she hadn't told him sooner because she'd watched him fight so hard to be a good father already, and she couldn't bear to be the reason his life collapsed again. He listened, really listened, for the first time. And in that listening, his fear slowly turned into something else: clarity. He confessed his own truth too. How after his wife died, he'd promised himself he would never love again. How that promise had turned into a prison. How that night with her hadn't been weakness, but survival. When she asked him if he wanted this child, he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked into his son's room and watched him sleep, small chest rising and falling, unaware of how close his father had come to running from responsibility again. When he returned, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "I don't know how," he said. "But I'm not leaving." She didn't jump into his arms. She didn't smile. She simply exhaled, like someone who had been holding her breath for months. The real challenges came fast, his fear of judgment, her fear of being second place, the question of whether love could grow out of something so complicated. But day by day, something changed. Doctor visits. Awkward dinners. Quiet laughter. His son asking innocent questions. And one night, when she felt the baby kick and instinctively grabbed his hand, he realized the truth he had been too afraid to admit. This wasn't the end of his story, it was the beginning of a bigger one. The chapter ends with him standing beside her at an ultrasound, heartbeat echoing in the room, realizing that life doesn't wait until you're ready, it asks if you're brave enough to stay. And if this ending moved you, subscribe now, because stories like this, raw, emotional, and unforgettable, are exactly what this channel is all about. The outside world didn't slow down just because their lives had cracked open. Morning came, responsibilities followed, and reality pressed in hard. He dropped his son at school that day with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, then sat alone in his car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, realizing that being brave in a kitchen was one thing, but being brave in the world was something else entirely. Rumors moved faster than truth. A single dad. A pregnancy. People whispered, judged, calculated timelines that didn't belong to them. She felt it too, the way coworkers looked at her stomach before it even showed, the questions disguised as concern, the quiet isolation. They argued more than they expected. Not screaming fights, but tired ones, about money, space, expectations, fear. She accused him of staying only out of guilt. He accused her of pushing him away before he could even prove himself. One night, exhausted and emotional, she finally said the words that cut deepest, "If you leave now, it'll hurt less than later." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he did something unexpected, he introduced her to the one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. His son. The meeting was awkward, careful, fragile. A child trying to understand a woman who wasn't his mother, and a woman terrified she would never be enough. But when his son asked, "Are you going to stay?" something broke open in her chest. And when she nodded, the boy smiled like it was the simplest thing in the world. That night, after the child fell asleep, the single dad finally admitted the truth he had been avoiding. He wasn't afraid of becoming a father again. He was afraid of loving someone and losing them. She listened, tears quiet, understanding for the first time that his hesitation was pain, not rejection. The chapter closes with them sitting on the floor of the living room, backs against the couch, holding hands not because everything was fixed, but because they had decided to face the broken parts together. And if you're feeling this chapter, this is your moment. Subscribe to the channel, because the hardest test of love is still coming. Life didn't give them a gentle ending, it gave them a real one. Complications arrived without warning. Hospital rooms replaced comfort, and fear returned with sharp edges. Sitting beside her bed, watching monitors blink, he realized how deeply she had become part of his life, not as a responsibility, but as a partner. When doctors spoke in careful tones, he held her hand tighter than ever before, whispering promises he didn't know he was capable of making. In that moment, he understood something profound: love isn't proven in perfect moments, it's proven when everything is at risk. The baby survived. She recovered. And something inside him healed too. Months later, standing in the delivery room, holding their newborn for the first time, tears streaming freely, he knew that the question he had once asked in fear, "It's mine," had transformed into an answer rooted in certainty. Yes. And I'm staying. His son stood beside him, proud and curious, touching the baby's tiny hand, completing a family that hadn't followed any plan but had chosen each other anyway. The story doesn't end with perfection. It ends with growth. With late nights, shared laughter, scars that still ache, and a future built not on ease, but on commitment. As he locks the door of their home one quiet evening, baby asleep, family together, he remembers her words from the beginning, close the door. Back then, it meant protection. Now, it means belonging. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, subscribe to the channel, because the most powerful stories aren't about perfect lives, they're about choosing love when it's hardest. Time didn't magically make things easy, it made them honest. Sleepless nights blended into early mornings, and the house learned a new rhythm shaped by soft cries and whispered reassurances. He struggled more than he admitted, caught between wanting to be strong and fearing he wasn't enough. Watching her move through motherhood with quiet determination stirred something painful inside him, not jealousy, but regret for every moment he had doubted her, doubted them. One night, after a long argument over something small that was really about everything, he finally broke. Sitting on the edge of the bed, voice shaking, he confessed the truth he had buried since the beginning. He didn't just fear loss, he feared becoming the man who failed twice. Failed his late wife. Failed his children. She didn't interrupt. She didn't correct him. She simply reminded him of the nights he rocked the baby so she could sleep, the mornings he made his son feel safe, the way love showed up even when fear was louder. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that pain didn't disqualify him from happiness, it proved he cared. That realization changed everything. He stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop and started choosing presence instead. And when he quietly said, "I don't want to just stay, I want to build a life with you," it wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was a promise forged in exhaustion and truth. If this chapter hit home for you, subscribe to the channel, because healing doesn't come all at once, and the final chapter delivers the moment that makes it all worth it. The future didn't arrive with fireworks, it arrived with certainty. Months later, standing in a small room filled with family, laughter, and the weight of everything they had survived, he took her hand and felt peace instead of fear. His son stood close, proud, understanding in ways children sometimes do better than adults. When he spoke his vows, they weren't about perfection or forever without struggle, they were about choosing each other even when life was messy. When she answered, her voice steady, the quiet strength that had carried her from the very beginning shone through. And in that moment, he understood the full circle of their story. What began as a question asked in fear became a life chosen in love. That night, after everyone left, he stood in the doorway of their home, listening to the soft sounds of sleep inside, his son, his partner, their child, and remembered the night she had told him to close the door. Back then, it was about protection. Now, it was about commitment. He closed it gently, not to shut the world out, but to hold their life together. And if you've stayed until the end of this story, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. Subscribe now, because the most powerful stories aren't about how love starts, they're about why it stays.